The escape pods crashed into the squishy, purple dirt of Nemora Prime like angry meteors. Steam hissed out as 20 elite students from the Interstellar Survival Academy found themselves scattered across the alien forest. Each trainee represented the best their species had to offer in survival skills. For most, this final test would decide everything. Become an officer or stay a nobody. None of them expected Nemora Prime to feel so alive. The trees didn't just stand there like Earth's boring pines. They twisted and pulsed like they were breathing. Their bark glistened with slime that caught the weird light. The air reeked of rot and plant juice, while the ground felt like walking on a giant waterbed. Lina Hayes stepped out of her pod without making a fuss. Unlike the others, she didn't touch the emergency beacon. A veteran of Earth's few remaining wild places, she knew better. In this kind of test, calling for help meant instant failure. Above, flashes marked other pods landing. Some crashed through branches like drunk drivers, while others floated down with fancy stabilizers. Lina knew her classmates had packed all kinds of high-tech gadgets, biological enhancements, and species-specific survival gizmos. She brought only her body, her mind, and what Earth's ancient forests had taught her. This wasn't her being cocky, it was instinct. She crouched to touch the spongy ground. It felt alive, a living carpet of rotting plants and glowing fungus. Tiny organisms were already trying to figure out what she was made of. Gross. She wiped her hands on her pants and started moving. As she walked, a strange sensation prickled at the back of her neck. She turned slowly to find a small, iridescent creature hovering a few feet away. It resembled a dragonfly, but with 4 sets of wings and what looked like tiny eyes covering its body. It didn't seem aggressive, just curious. "Hey there," she whispered. "I'm just passing through." The creature tilted in midair, its wings creating a soft humming sound. Then suddenly it darted forward and landed on her shoulder. Lina froze, unsure if this was a threat or something else. The tiny being's touch felt warm through her uniform fabric. After a moment, it took flight again, circled her head once, and zipped off into the forest canopy. "Well, that was weird," Lina muttered, but somehow she felt like she'd just passed some kind of test. Perhaps not everything on this planet was trying to kill her. Nearby, a tall, blue-skinned trainee named Krex was making clicking sounds to map his surroundings. His species, the Viridians, evolved navigating hollow asteroids using echolocation. But on Nemora Prime, his clicks disappeared into the sound-eating plants, returning nothing. Frustrated, he clicked louder, basically sending out dinner invitations to whatever lurked in the bushes behind him. Lina heard the rustling but kept walking. During the briefing, she'd memorized the rules. 24 hours, no tech, no help, no talking. The goal was simple: survive and build a shelter that could handle the planet's notorious night phase. The instructors had been annoyingly vague about what night phase actually meant. She stopped at a small clearing surrounded by weird rocks and half-fallen trees. She could see footprints showing others had passed through, probably looking for higher ground or flatter spots. They'd moved on, but Lina stayed put. Something about this place felt safer. The air was cooler, and the creepy vibrations that filled the forest seemed quieter here. She dropped her tiny survival kit and started checking out the trees. Meanwhile, deeper in the green chaos, a fish-like trainee named Zeph from the Waterworld Hydrosia was having a terrible time. He tried building a shelter by weaving big leaves together with sticky goo from his hands. But the leaves kept sliding apart like they hated each other. Cursing in his bubbly language, he swatted at glittery insects, which exploded into acid vapor. His painful screams echoed through the trees. "Probably shouldn't poke the local wildlife," Lina muttered to herself with a small smile. Someone called out to Zeph, but the forest swallowed the sound like it never happened. Lina found a promising tree. It leaned at just the right angle to climb, with thick branches above, perfect for holding weight. She tested a nearby vine by pulling it hard. Finding it strong, she started climbing, wrapping her legs around the trunk while her boots found natural footholds. As she climbed, she noticed something odd. Small symbols carved into the bark at irregular intervals. They weren't natural patterns. They looked deliberate, like some kind of writing. Had someone been here before? Another trainee, perhaps? But these marks looked weathered, old. "Curiouser and curiouser," she whispered. tracing one to the symbols with her finger. It resembled an arrow pointing upward. Taking it as a good sign, she continued her ascent. The tree smelled like pennies, suggesting metal in its sap. The surface felt weirdly slippery, but Lina climbed carefully, one move at a time, until she reached a wide fork between branches. Here she could start building. To her surprise, she found a small, smooth depression in the branch junction, almost like a natural seat. It was too perfect to be accidental. Looking more closely, she noticed more of those strange symbols etched around the edge of the depression. Someone's been using this spot, she realized. Whether it was a previous Academy trainee or something native to Nemora Prime, she couldn't tell. But it reinforced her choice. This was a good spot for shelter. She caught her breath and looked around. From up here, she could see chaos, flashes of failed energy tools, aliens running frantically with armfuls of useless plants, some digging hopelessly into the resistant dirt, others frozen in panic. She watched a bug the size of a small dog spray a screaming trainee with paralyzing goo. The victim twitched before going still. A floating camera appeared, recorded the failure, then vanished. The Academy was watching, taking notes. Reality show directors would kill for this footage, Lina thought. Lina turned back to her chosen spot. She'd found 3 more branches at the same height, forming a rough square, the perfect foundation. From her survival kit, she took out her only allowed tool, a carbon fiber knife. With practiced skill, she started cutting long strips of inner bark to use as rope. She hummed softly while working, a habit from camping in the Sierra Nevada mountains. The tune seemed to calm both her and, strangely, the forest itself. As she worked, a sound caught her attention, a soft melodic whistling from a nearby tree. She paused, knife in hand, and listened. The whistling seemed to mimic her humming, echoing the same simple tune she'd been making. Carefully, she peered around the trunk. On a branch about 10 feet away perched another trainee, a small, bird-like being with feathered skin in various shades of green. The Academy patch on their uniform identified them as Pix from the arboreal world Canopia. Unlike the panicked actions of the others, Pix was methodically weaving a small nest-like structure using their own molted feathers and thin twigs. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither moved. Then Pix raised 3 feathered fingers in a gesture Lina recognized from orientation. The silent salute of mutual respect. Lina returned the gesture. No words were needed. The rules forbade communication. But in that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. 2 beings who understood the value of height and quiet in a dangerous forest. Pix resumed whistling, and Lina went back to her work. Though separated by species and evolution, their approach to survival was remarkably similar. Lina smiled to herself. Maybe she wasn't the only one who understood this place. Hours passed, the alien sun barely moved, yet the shadows shifted in unsettling ways. Time on Nemora Prime followed its own rules. Lina didn't waste energy watching the sky. She trusted her internal clock. Through the dense leaves, she heard desperate voices. Panicked instructions shouted. Theories about electromagnetic interference. Debates about gravity anomalies. Some trainees had convinced themselves the trees formed a giant brain. Others thought the whole test was a simulation. Lina ignored their theories and focused on her shelter. What mattered was staying off the ground when darkness fell. From across the forest, a thunderous crack echoed through the trees. The unmistakable sound of something big breaking. A scream followed, then silence. Someone had met one of Nemora Prime's local monsters. Lina flinched but kept working. Her years of Earth survival training, hiking, building, fixing, improvising without technology, had taught her how to handle fear. She'd faced real danger before. She would face it again. She secured the first support branch with a double-wrapped knot she'd practiced hundreds of times. The platform began taking shape, slowly and quietly. The trees swayed beneath her as cool air passed through the leaves, making her feel weightless for a moment. But her focus remained solid, her hands steady. Occasionally, she glanced toward Pix's tree. The avian trainee was making good progress on their nest. Their natural affinity for heights gave them an advantage in this environment. Unlike Lina, they could hop from branch to branch with perfect balance, gathering materials without descending to the dangerous forest floor. Below, another trainee's shelter collapsed with a loud crash. Angry swearing followed. Lina didn't look down. She had work to finish. The light started fading, not gradually like Earth's sunset, but in weird pulses. One moment, golden rays filtered through the leaves. The next, long shadows swallowed everything in irregular patterns. The forest canopy seemed to contract, like a living ceiling closing shut. Lina paused, sitting still on her high perch. Her shelter was taking good shape, but wasn't complete. She had arranged several large, palm-like leaves across the top, stitched together with braided bark fiber. The structure wobbled slightly with each breeze, but it held firm. A sudden movement caught her eye. Pix was gesturing urgently, pointing upward. Lina followed their gaze and saw it, a dark cloud of what looked like insects descending through the canopy. Unlike the smaller creatures she'd seen earlier, these moved as a coordinated unit, like a school of fish in three-dimensional space. Without hesitation, Lina grabbed the remaining leaves and quickly completed her roof, sealing the gaps. Through a small opening, she watched as the cloud engulfed Pix's tree. The avian trainee disappeared inside their nest, pulling a woven mat over the entrance. The insect clouds swirled around the trees, seeking warmth and movement. Lina held perfectly still as a portion of the swarm investigated her shelter. Through tiny gaps in the leaves, she could see individual insects, each the size of a honeybee, but with transparent bodies that pulsed with bioluminescent light. One found a small opening and squeezed through, hovering inches from Lina's face. Its light cast strange shadows in her shelter. Up close, she could see it wasn't an insect at all, but something more like a tiny jellyfish that somehow flew through air instead of water. Its tentacles twitched as it sensed her body heat. Lina didn't move, didn't even blink. After what seemed like eternity, the creature lost interest and squeezed back through the gap, rejoining the swarm. Gradually, the cloud moved on, continuing its hunt through the forest. Once they were gone, Lina carefully sealed the remaining gaps in her shelter. She had learned something valuable. On Nemora Prime, the dangers came from all directions, not just the ground. Beneath her, the forest changed. The air grew suddenly cold, bringing a damp chill that soaked through clothes and skin. Lina pulled out the thermal fabric hidden in her kit, a square of special material with earth-made insulation. She wrapped it around her shoulders, careful to keep her balance. The air no longer smelled of plants. Now it carried the scent of wet metal mixed with something sickly sweet and disgusting. From somewhere distant came a piercing shriek, neither human nor any known species. It echoed once, then stopped abruptly. The forest went quiet again. "Guess the welcome party started without me," Lina whispered to herself. She leaned forward carefully, steadying herself while studying the darkness below. The undergrowth moved without wind. Something big was down there. She could feel it through vibrations in the trunk beneath her. A stocky, rust-colored trainee named Dorvo stumbled through nearby bushes. He'd chosen the lowland for his shelter, thinking the ground would be good for digging. His species, the pteridites, were natural tunnelers, but Nemora Prime didn't care about anyone's natural talents. The ground here wasn't stable dirt, but layered biomass that reacted when disturbed. Dorvo had spent hours trying to dig a protective hole, but now the earth itself was fighting back. He struggled to breathe, his strong limbs covered in purple mud, eyes darting frantically across the growing shadows. The hole he'd dug was filling with thick goo that stuck to his shell and made breathing difficult. Each breath made a wet, rasping sound. As he turned to escape his collapsing pit, his leg got caught in a snake-like root that tightened when touched. It coiled around his ankle, squeezing harder with each struggle. He fell backward with a grunt, hitting the wet ground. His desperate calls for help disappeared into the forest's weird acoustics. Lina watched from above, not cruelly but with grim understanding. Earlier, she'd tested how sound worked here by calling out once, checking if anyone nearby was coordinating efforts. The echo came back distorted, playing her voice in reverse like it was mocking her. She understood then that making noise on Nemora Prime was probably a bad idea. Rule 1 of horror movies: don't make a sound, she thought. These guys clearly skipped that class. Dorvo fought desperately for several more seconds before finally cutting the squeezing tendril with his field blade. He didn't look up, unaware someone was watching. A sudden movement from above drew Lina's attention. Pigs had emerged from their nest and was carefully making their way down the tree trunk. To Lina's surprise, the avian trainee was heading toward Dorvo. Was Pix going to help him? That would violate the non-communication rule. But Pix didn't approach Dorvo directly. Instead, they landed on a low branch and deliberately dropped a small object, what looked like a tightly woven ball of fibers. It landed near Dorvo, who spotted it immediately. Inside was a sticky resin that, when applied to his feet, prevented the living roots from grabbing him again. Pix had found a way to help without direct communication. Lina nodded with respect. Sometimes the rules needed creative interpretation. Not far away, a skinny, multi-armed trainee named Syla from the Ixari species tried creating a floating shelter using flower power levitation, a technique from her low-gravity homeworld. She gathered large, pale blossoms and triggered their floating sacks, expecting them to lift a hammock-like structure she'd woven. But Nemora Prime's gravity didn't cooperate. The sacks burst, releasing glowing particles that stuck to her exoskeleton. At first, she thought it was harmless, until the particles started burning like acid. Her movements became wild, her screams creating an eerie contrast with the glowing cloud that surrounded her suffering. Lina looked away. No point watching what she couldn't help. The sun, or whatever passed for a sun on this world, vanished completely. Darkness fell like someone flipped a switch. Lina struck a small piece of flint against another stone she'd wedged in the bark, creating a few sparks. She'd prepared a nest of dried moss and bark bits, and after several attempts, an ember caught. Leaning in, she gently coaxed it to life with careful breaths. A small orange glow bloomed in the tinder, which she transferred to a little bowl made from spiral bark. The flame wouldn't last long, but it gave enough warmth to bring feeling back to her fingers and fight off the immediate cold. She put the smoldering bark inside a reflective leaf dome to hide the light from hungry eyes. From the surrounding forest came increased sounds of movement, claws scraping against wood, padded feet pressing into plants, long tails sweeping through the undergrowth. Nothing approached her yet, but she sensed their awareness. Nemora Prime's predators hunted mainly by smell and vibration. Light would attract their curiosity, noise would trigger their hunting instinct, and heat might draw the boldest ones. Lina sat perfectly still, her breathing almost invisible. Legs folded beneath her and arms crossed to keep warm. Something large moved beneath her tree. Not the earlier predator, but something new. Through gaps in her platform, she could make out a massive shape dragging itself along the forest floor. It moved slowly, methodically, as if searching for something. Then she realized what it was. One of the retrieval drones, damaged and malfunctioning. The drone's lights flickered erratically, and its propulsion system emitted an unnatural whining sound. It had likely been attacked by one of the forest predators and brought down. Now it was attracting attention, exactly what no one wanted during the night phase. A faint distress signal pulsed from the drone, drawing more curious predators to the area. Lina could only watch as the damaged machine dragged itself in circles beneath her tree, its programming corrupted but still trying to complete its mission. The drone was creating a problem. Its movements and signals were drawing predators directly to her location. She had two choices: stay absolutely still and hope they'd focus on the drone, or try to disable the machine to stop it from attracting more attention. Neither option was good. Moving would reveal her position, but staying put while predators gathered below was equally dangerous. She made her decision. Reaching into her shelter, she retrieved one of the smooth stones she'd collected earlier. With careful aim, she dropped it directly onto the drone's main sensor array. The impact wasn't hard, but it was precise enough to disrupt the already damaged systems. The drone sputtered, its lights blinking out one by one. The distress signal faded, and after a final mechanical twitch, it lay still. The forest predators continued to circle it cautiously, but without the signals and movement, they soon lost interest and moved on. Lina exhaled slowly. A risky move, but it had worked. Another scream pierced the darkness, this one a choked, gurgling gasp. A massive trainee called Gorn had built a lean-to shelter using broad leaves and fibrous stems. Now those seemingly harmless materials had started writhing in the darkness, twisting into tight knots that pierced his protective armor. He'd assumed the thorns were just passive defenses, not active hunting mechanisms. His cry faded into silence, followed by a long dragging sound. Note to self, the plants here are definitely not vegan-friendly, Lina thought grimly. She maintained her focus, refusing to let fear cloud her judgment. To the west, another trainee activated their emergency beacon, a small red light pulsing upward as a retrieval drone descended. The drone scanned the area, extended mechanical arms, and extracted the failed candidate without a word. One eliminated. 19 remained, perhaps fewer. Suddenly, from directly beneath her platform came a series of rhythmic thumps. Lina froze. Something big was circling the base of her tree. She couldn't see it, but the bark beneath her fingertips transmitted its movements. The creature moved with predatory confidence, stepping deliberately over obstacles, brushing against nearby vegetation. Then, abruptly, all movement stopped. The forest seemed to hold its breath. 1 minute passed, then 5, then 10. Lina remained perfectly still. She had put out her fire, masked her scent with natural soil compounds, chosen a tree with no obvious climbing route, and avoided breaking branches during her ascent. She hoped it would be enough. The darkness deepened. The forest eventually resumed its activity, but the movements now came from farther away. The predator had moved on. Lina exhaled slowly, allowing her eyes to close momentarily, not sleeping but resetting her mental state. She needed to conserve energy for the coming hours. A gentle rustling drew her attention upward. Tiny glowing creatures emerged from holes in the surrounding bark, floating lazily around her shelter. They didn't sting or bite, they simply hovered, their light steady and somehow comforting. One landed on her hand, and for the first time since landing, Lina allowed herself a small smile. She had survived the first phase, but she knew the night would only get worse. Looking across to Pix's tree, she saw their nest was still intact, with no movement inside. She hoped the avian trainee was okay. Despite the prohibition against alliances, she found herself glad that someone else was taking a similar approach to survival. The forest pulsed with menace as the darkness reached its deepest point. The air pressed down like a wet blanket, soaked with moisture. Every branch above Lina trembled with invisible tension, and each breeze carried whispers that almost sounded like words. Despite the oppressive conditions above and the lurking dangers below, she maintained her disciplined stillness. Her mind methodically reviewed her next steps. The outer edge of her platform needed more reinforcement, and the roof still had gaps that could let in rain, or worse, flying predators. But patience told her to wait. Instinct whispered that movement attracted attention, that panic made you pray. She endured the increasing cold until it became physically painful before resuming her work. The thermal wrap she had around her shoulders had soaked up too much moisture to stay effective, so she removed it, folded it neatly, and tucked it into a natural crack in the tree. After rubbing her arms vigorously to restore circulation, she retrieved a handful of small branches she had carefully selected and stored earlier on a nearby limb. These were naturally dried, rigid and curved, perfect for interlocking structural components. Crouching low to maintain balance, she fitted 2 branches into a corner joint, then secured them with her remaining braided cordage. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried, her concentration complete. Unlike her fellow trainees, Lina's thoughts weren't cluttered with theoretical probabilities or simulated scenarios. She wasn't calculating survival percentages or applying algorithmic solutions. She was listening to the wind's subtle changes, to the occasional distant snaps of vegetation, to the almost imperceptible stretching of her binding materials as she tightened them. Grandma always said, "Don't think like a computer when the forest can hear your thoughts," she remembered with a small smile. It made no logical sense, but out here, it felt like perfect wisdom. The contrast between instinct and intelligence had never seemed clearer. Most academy trainees relied on tactical programming, predictive modeling, and AI-enhanced scenario planning. Lina's training came from her grandmother in the remnant wilderness of Montana, where observation beat prediction, where listening trumped analysis. Far below, another incident unfolded. A tall, skinny trainee with see-through skin named Krex had constructed a perfect dome using packed vegetation and chemical secretions. The structure looked flawless, with perfect geometric symmetry, but it had one fatal flaw. It sat on the ground and now acted as a heat beacon, attracting night scavengers drawn to the chemical smell of the binding agent. Lina heard muffled shouting, followed by a sharp cry as the dome imploded. Moments later came the distinctive hum of a retrieval drone ascending through the canopy. Engineering degree, 1 million credits. Learning to climb a tree, priceless, she thought. She maintained her focus. Her goal wasn't to outperform others, but to outlast the environment itself. She secured the final structural piece, completing a strong triangular roof frame. Next, she positioned 2 large, wing-shaped leaves across the top. Using slender thorn-like structures she had harvested earlier as natural fasteners. The process required precision. Each thorn needed to pierce the fibrous veins of the leaves without tearing the delicate tissue. When completed, the overlapping leaf layer formed a water-resistant covering that naturally curved with the structure, creating a dome that channeled moisture away from the center. With the shelter completed, Lina carefully lowered herself into its center and tested the structural integrity by shifting her weight methodically from side to side. The entire construction rocked slightly, but held firm. It made a single creak before settling into place. She laid down, stretching out on her back for the first time since arrival. Above her, pinpoints of light penetrated the gaps in the canopy, though some blinked and moved in patterns that suggested they weren't stars at all. She recognized that some of Nemora Prime's creatures had evolved to mimic star patterns to lure flying prey. Even the apparent stars couldn't be trusted here. "Great, even the constellations are trying to eat me," she muttered. She reached into a small hollow she had created and retrieved a round fruit gathered earlier in the day. It resembled a pomegranate, but with a spiral pattern etched into its skin. She had watched small furry creatures eating similar ones without dropping dead, giving her enough confidence to try it herself. Carefully peeling back the spiral exterior revealed a pale blue interior that smelled faintly of cucumber with metallic hints. She took a cautious bite. The texture was gritty, the flavor bland, but not unpleasant. Most importantly, it contained nutrients and moisture her body desperately needed. She chewed slowly, conserving both energy and food. As she ate, Lina thought about how different her approach was from her classmates. She recalled the Academy orientation, where aliens arrived in ceremonial battle armor and high-tech exoskeletons. Some had looked at her curiously, others with obvious contempt. None had imagined that a human from Earth, a planet widely considered a technological backwater, could compete with species bred specifically for adaptive survival or engineered with biological advantages. But Lina hadn't grown up in Earth's sterilized dome cities that most galactic citizens associated with her homeworld. She had been raised in an off-grid community, climbing trees taller than urban towers, trapping invasive species, and fixing broken equipment with duct tape and determination. Her training hadn't come from laboratories or simulators. It had come from scraped knees and hard-earned lessons. Dad always said humans were the cockroaches of the galaxy, she thought with a grin. Too stubborn to die out properly. A sound reached her ears, closer than previous disturbances. She sat up carefully, joints moving silently, eyes scanning the lower branches. A shadow glided across the forest floor with unnatural smoothness. The creature moved with methodical precision, limbs bending at impossible angles, a narrow head that rotated independently of its body, and feet that left no prints in the soil. It paused directly beneath her tree and raised its sensory cluster, multiple eyes emitting a soft amber glow. Lina remained absolutely motionless, even holding her breath. The predator lingered, seemingly analyzing its surroundings, then abruptly changed direction and continued into the undergrowth, apparently detecting more promising prey elsewhere. She lowered herself back into a resting position, allowing tension to gradually leave her muscles. Whether the creature had failed to detect her presence or simply prioritize other targets remained unclear. But she wouldn't allow assumptions to compromise her vigilance. She adjusted her covering of layered vegetation and pulled the thermal material closer around her body. A sudden cry of frustration pierced the night from a nearby sector. The voice belonged to Krex, a slender, fur-covered trainee with multiple upper limbs and glowing red eyes. He had spent hours constructing a levitating shelter by manipulating the magnetic properties of local mineral deposits, programming the field fluctuations using a specialized biochemical ink secreted from his fingertips. But something had disrupted the carefully calibrated polarity. The shelter spun uncontrollably before collapsing in a brilliant discharge of released energy. Nex's anguished cry dissolved into silence. Another retrieval, another elimination. And the award for most complicated way to die goes to Lina thought. She closed her eyes, not celebrating her continued survival, but recognizing a fundamental truth. Nemora Prime didn't reward intelligence or creativity for their own sake. It acknowledged only those who listened, adapted, and respected its fundamental nature. She repositioned herself, wrapping the thermal cloth more securely around her torso. Her shelter now enclosed her on three sides, with only a small opening near her feet allowing air circulation. Her elevated position protected her from ground-dwelling threats. Her scent was neutralized, her fire extinguished, her hunger temporarily satisfied, her tools secured within reach. She had done everything possible. Lina allowed her mind to drift, not into vulnerable sleep, but into heightened observation. She recalled her father's voice reciting ancient wilderness journals during power outages. She remembered her grandmother's wisdom. Your brain will save you, but only when your body knows when to stay still. Those words had guided her throughout this ordeal, and now, surrounded by alien darkness, they provided structure to her resolve. The forest emitted a low, resonant vibration that seemed to penetrate her very bones. But this time, Lina didn't react. She had begun to understand its language. The first genuine scream didn't occur until after the second phase of darkness descended. Lina had already discerned that Nemora Prime's night wasn't a single continuous state, but a fluctuating sequence of shadow and pressure that moved like ocean currents through the forest. Each successive wave introduced a new level of cold, a new quality of atmospheric density, and a corresponding shift in the acoustic profile of the surrounding ecosystem. The second wave struck with greater intensity than the first. Her body responded automatically, shoulders tensing, breathing becoming shallow, heart slowing to match the enveloping silence. The scream erupted from the northern quadrant, raw and saturated with terror. It didn't rise and fall naturally. It tore through the darkness like fabric being violently ripped. Lina sat upright instantly. Her shelter maintained integrity, but the sound reverberated through the organic structure beneath her. She regulated her breathing and listened attentively. The scream persisted for 3 extended seconds before stopping abruptly. She recognized the voice, likely Marvox, a muscular trainee from the volcanic world Pyrrhus. He had displayed particular confidence during pre-examination simulations, openly ridiculing her minimal equipment selection. Now he was either being eaten or extracted. Guess all those muscles weren't much help against something with more teeth, she thought grimly. Moments later, a brilliant white light swept across the forest as a retrieval drone descended. She remained motionless as the drone hovered briefly in the vicinity of the disturbance, deployed scanning technology, then ascended carrying an indistinct form in its mechanical appendages. Whether it transported a corpse or a living, broken candidate remained unclear. But Marvox had been eliminated. Another voice silenced. Lina checked the tension of her bark bindings at the shelter's perimeter. All connections remained secure. The slight movement triggered a response from below, a deep, liquid growl, not particularly loud but resonant with predatory intent. It originated from something positioned directly beneath the base of her tree, not circling like the earlier hunter, but waiting with calculated patience. She didn't risk looking downward. She closed her eyes and exhaled gradually through her nose. An hour passed, her muscles ached from maintaining an awkward position, her legs beginning to tremble from sustained tension. The growling eventually subsided, but she knew better than to assume the predator had abandoned its vigil. It might be waiting for sound, for movement, or for the inevitable weakness that exhaustion would eventually produce. She rotated her position with glacial slowness, alleviating pressure on her lower limbs while maintaining her upper body in a stable, alert posture. The night had turned increasingly hostile. She could sense it. Nemora Prime wasn't merely hosting the examination. It was actively evaluating each candidate, testing not just survival skills but adaptation capacity. For a planet with no student loans, it sure knows how to apply pressure, she thought. To the southeast, a sudden eruption of green light flared through the trees. Someone had ignited a chemical illuminator. Lina blinked reflexively, then immediately regretted even that minimal movement. The light would attract everything within kilometers. The illuminator belonged to Renix, a trainee from the perpetually illuminated orbital habitat Lumina. His species evolved in light-saturated environments and relied on bioluminescent signals for communication. But this wasn't his native environment. The glow illuminated the surrounding area, briefly revealing his figure racing between trees, the torch swinging erratically in his grasp. Then something massive and blindingly fast lunged from the shadows, too rapid for visual identification. The illuminator dropped, the light extinguished. There was no scream this time, only a profound impact followed by silence. No retrieval drone materialized. Light bad, stillness good? Not exactly rocket science, Lina mumbled under her breath. Lina swallowed despite her parched throat, her saliva tasting of metal. Her extremities had lost sensation despite the shelter's protection. The physical strain had begun infiltrating her thought processes. She deliberately slowed her respiration. Fear was counterproductive. She needed clarity, not adrenaline-fueled reaction. From above, the branches shifted, not from atmospheric disturbance, but from applied weight. Something was climbing, not near her position, but within visual range. The movement pattern was deliberate, the intermittent pauses rhythmic and calculating. She rotated her head without corresponding body movement. In her peripheral vision, she discerned the source. A trainee was climbing, or more accurately, scrambling, upward with exposed appendages. She recognized the silhouette. Torval, a wide-eyed, emerald-skinned trainee from a high-gravity world. He had underestimated the forest's complexity and now attempted to replicate her elevation strategy. Too late and with excessive noise. He reached an elevated branch, hauled himself onto it, and began emitting soft vocalizations of distress, unaware of how efficiently sound propagated through the upper canopy. Lina observed as two luminous entities began circling the trunk beneath his position. They moved with feline grace, but their posterior appendages maintained unnatural rigidity, and their sensory organs lacked pigmentation. Torval remained oblivious to their presence, but they had detected him with precision. Lina averted her gaze, unwilling to witness the inevitable outcome. Copycat climbers always fall the hardest, she thought with resignation. Then came the cascade effect. One scream triggered another. From the western sector, someone called desperately for assistance in a fractured dialect. From the south, a shelter combusted when a thermal regulation crystal malfunctioned. A trainee ignited spontaneously and rolled into the undergrowth thing, setting surrounding vegetation ablaze. Nemora Prime's ecosystem responded by releasing thick azure spores that extinguished thermal energy, but coated all surfaces with adhesive mucilage. The trainee's form was absorbed into the vegetation. No retrieval, no signal, gone. Even the fire department here eats you, Lina noted mentally. That's dedication to public service. Lina calculated the diminishing numbers. Initially, 20 candidates had been deployed. By her estimation, perhaps 8 remained, possibly fewer. She refocused her concentration. She withdrew a small container, fabricated earlier from overlapping bark segments. Inside, she had concealed 3 polished stones with metallic particulate on their surfaces. They reflected minimal ambient light, functional as emergency signaling devices, but only at close range. She arranged them in a triangular configuration beside her elbow. If something breached her platform, she could strike them together, generating a sharp, sudden vibration. It wouldn't facilitate escape, but might momentarily distract a predator, a final defensive option. The remainder of the night progressed with excruciating slowness. Every breath represented a conscious decision. Every sound carried potential consequences. The forest had silenced even the most confident trainees. Communication had ceased entirely. Several hours before dawn, the growling returned beneath her tree, more proximate than before. She gripped the edge of her shelter and leaned forward with infinitesimal slowness. Redistributing her weight, through a narrow gap in the foliage, she glimpsed it. Not clearly, but sufficiently. A massive organism with obsidian epidermis interrupted by translucent patches of muscular tissue that emitted a subtle phosphorescence. Its olfactory organs expanded as it navigated beneath her position. 6 ambulatory limbs supported its bulk, but no visible oral cavity could be discerned. A bifurcated spinal structure featured a prominent ridge that vibrated with each movement. "Where's your mouth, buddy?" she wondered. "Actually, I probably don't want to know." It wasn't actively hunting, it was systematically investigating. She suspended her breathing entirely. Eventually, the creature redirected, brushing against a nearby trunk. The tree emitted a low resonant frequency as it adjusted to the creature's substantial mass. A tremor propagated through the soil, through the organic matter, through her skeletal structure. And then it departed, just as suddenly as it had appeared. She exhaled, eyes wide, fingers still firmly grasping the shelter's edge. She had endured. The most dangerous period had passed, though dawn had not yet arrived. She didn't trust Nemora Prime to permit sunrise without a final challenge. The sky didn't brighten gradually, it fractured. A pale, silvery fissure appeared between the uppermost branches, not resembling terrestrial dawn, but suggesting that some ancient, massive presence had finally lifted its influence from the forest. The stars vanished sequentially, some fading naturally, while others terminated abruptly, like artificial illumination being deactivated. "Whoever's running the light show needs to work on their transitions," she thought. The humidity persisted, but the atmospheric character transformed, from the compressed silence of predatory hours to something expectant, anticipatory. Lina opened her eyes, not because of external stimuli, but because the pressure within her chest had finally dissipated. She sat up cautiously, peeling back the layered vegetation of her shelter and blinking in the diffuse illumination. Her joints initially resisted movement. Prolonged immobility had stiffened her muscles, and the persistent cold had infiltrated her bones. She extended her neck, rotated her shoulders, and pressed her palms together until her joints produced audible compression sounds. The platform had maintained integrity. Her shelter, though rudimentary, had survived the nocturnal ordeal. She examined the binding materials. None had failed, no structural components had compromised. The simple materials, selected not for innovation but for reliability, had outlasted the challenge. "Sometimes boring beats brilliant," she muttered with satisfaction. She maneuvered to the edge and peered downward through the vegetation. The forest floor was now visible, a shifting landscape of ash-colored vegetation, fractured branches, and dark stains that hadn't been present during initial deployment. Her tree remained unscathed, but others nearby hadn't fared as favorably. Looking toward Pix's tree, she was pleased to see movement. The avian trainee had survived the night as well. They emerged from their nest, stretching their feathered limbs in the early light. Noticing Lina, they offered a small gesture that might have been a salute, or perhaps just acknowledgement. To her right, approximately 10 meters distant, a shelter had collapsed into a heap of charred organic matter and severed vines. Nearby, a claw mark extending 4 meters had been gouged into the soil. No remains were visible, no movement detected, just the aftermath of panic, partially obscured by morning condensation. A faint mechanical sound disrupted the silence, a low, consistent hum. She elevated her gaze. Above the canopy, gliding like phantoms across the cloud formations, came the retrieval drones. They had adopted a new configuration. Instead of responding individually to emergency signals, they now moved in coordinated patterns, scanning and collecting. The examination had concluded. She maintained her position, remaining motionless even as the first drone descended. It didn't approach her location but hovered above a nearby sector, extended mechanical appendages, and lowered a containment net to retrieve what appeared to be fragmented equipment. It retracted the net without ceremony. Another elimination. The drone ascended vertically and vanished into the atmospheric haze. A second drone passed directly above her position, hesitated briefly, then continued onward. She began counting the drones that arrived and those that departed carrying survivors or remains. One drone approached Pix's tree. The avian trainee stood tall on their branch, waiting calmly. The drone scanned their shelter, projected the same qualification symbol it would later show Lina, and moved on. Pix had passed too. She observed 2 additional drones retrieving intact trainees, one barely ambulatory, the other encased in emergency stasis gel. She recognized the second as Syla, her exoskeleton now dulled and fractured. Lina watched her ascent with respectful acknowledgement. She had survived, if marginally. Not bad for someone who tried to levitate on flowers, Lina thought with grudging respect. A distinctive drone descended and hovered adjacent to her tree. This model differed from the others, sleek, obsidian, and marked with the Interstellar Survival Academy's insignia, an evaluation unit. It carried no medical equipment, but projected a narrow-spectrum beam that systematically scanned her shelter's exterior. She remained motionless, posture erect, facial expression neutral. The drone rotated methodically, analyzing the base of her platform, the structural joints, the roofing components, then remained stationary for several seconds, apparently processing unexpected data. The beam redirected, projecting a pale azure circle beside her feet. A holographic display materialized, presenting a single word in multiple languages: qualified. She exhaled and acknowledged with a minimal nod. The drone withdrew, disappearing into the morning atmosphere. She stood, rising completely for the first time in many hours. Her legs trembled momentarily, and the platform creaked slightly beneath her, but she maintained equilibrium. "Primitive technology for the win," she whispered with a small smile. She surveyed her shelter one final time. The binding techniques she had implemented, the structural forms she had created from memory rather than programming. Then she knelt and untied the central binding that secured the roof structure. The vegetation collapsed inward with controlled precision, like fabric being folded. She gathered her few possessions, the bark container, the polished stones, her thermal material, and began her descent. The journey downward required more time than the ascent. Each movement demanded careful evaluation. Each foothold required double verification. Her hands ached from gripping unprocessed wood, but she refused to rush. When her boots finally contacted the forest floor, they sank slightly into the vegetation, but the sensation felt earned. The forest no longer pressed against her with hostile intent. It remained alert, but no longer actively aggressive. As she proceeded forward, a natural pathway to the extraction zone emerged. Not an obvious trail, but a corridor where retrieval drones now hovered and surviving trainees converged, some limping, others visibly traumatized, but alive. To her surprise, Pix landed gracefully beside her, matching her pace. The avian trainee offered a small nod, then held out their three-fingered hand. In it was one of the strange symbols Lina had seen carved into the tree, a small token made of polished wood. "For luck," Pix said in a musical voice, breaking the silence now that the examination had officially ended. "You survived like the ancients did." Lina accepted the token with a nod. "The ancients? My people studied this planet long ago," Pix explained. "Those markings you saw, they're navigation signs left by my ancestors. They discovered the same truth you did, that simplicity survives here. Most modern species have forgotten." "So you knew where to build your nest?" Lina asked. Pix's feathers ruffled in what might have been a laugh. "I knew where the safe spots were, yes, but knowing and doing are different things. You figured it out without any help." Before Lina could respond, they arrived at the extraction zone. She passed a trainee she didn't recognize, a male with ashen skin and vacant eyes. He didn't acknowledge her presence. She hadn't expected recognition. This environment had extracted something fundamental from each participant. For some, it would never be restored. "Still beats finals week," she muttered. The staging area was a shallow depression surrounded by trees that had reflexively retracted their branches, as if recognizing the conclusion of the examination. A singular platform hovered at the center, where academy instructors maintained silent vigil. Documentation devices in hand, expressions impassive. Individually, survivors were scanned, documented, and embarked. When her turn arrived, she stepped onto the platform and remained motionless as the scanner passed over her physical form. One instructor, a tall, crimson-scaled female with multiple sensory organs, tilted her head slightly and read information from her data interface. "Human trainee, shelter intact, no emergency signals activated, no physical injuries sustained, no environmental contamination, no structural failure." The male instructor leaned closer. "Was continuous monitoring maintained throughout the nocturnal cycle?" Affirmative, the female responded. Minimal movement detected. No panic response observed. No deviation from established survival protocols. The male nodded and recorded the assessment. Lina remained silent. She didn't inquire about her performance metrics. The numbers were irrelevant. She had overcome something more significant than statistical evaluation. Probably the first time doing nothing got an A+, she thought with internal amusement. The platform elevated and glided toward the waiting transport vessel. As she embarked, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in a polished surface. Her features appeared gaunt from physical stress and nutritional deficit, her clothing saturated with moisture and discolored with organic matter, her eyes hollow but resolute. She bore no resemblance to the trainees who had arrived in pristine uniforms and augmented equipment. She looked authentic, tested. She secured herself in a designated compartment. The cabin remained hushed as additional survivors entered sequentially. There was no celebration, no verbal exchange, only the silent presence of those who had witnessed the forest's true nature and emerged to witness the dawn. "Anyone bring snacks?" she asked casually into the silence. No one responded, but several eyes turned toward her in disbelief. As the transport ascended from Nemora Prime and the forest receded beneath atmospheric cloud formations, Lina closed her eyes, not to rest, but to internalize. Because someday, in a more hostile conflict or a more treacherous environment, what she had learned here would transcend any formal qualification or designation, and she would remember. "Next time I'll bring marshmallows," she promised herself with a small smile. Nothing says survivor like making s'mores while death stalks below. As the ship broke atmosphere, the remaining trainees finally began to relax, shoulders dropping, breath coming easier. One of them, a purple-skinned trainee with 4 eyes, looked over at Lina with newfound respect. "How did you know to build in the trees?" he asked, breaking the silence. Lina shrugged. "On Earth, the most dangerous things are usually on the ground. I figured an alien death forest wouldn't be much different." "But your shelter, it was so simple," another trainee commented, this one with metallic scales. "No energy fields, no adaptive materials." "Simple doesn't break," Lina replied. "My grandmother taught me that fancy gadgets fail when you need them most." The first trainee nodded slowly. "My species has relied on quantum technology for so long that we've forgotten how to tie knots." "I could teach you sometime," Lina offered. "Might come in handy the next time your quantum whatever runs out of juice." For the first time since the ordeal began, laughter, albeit nervous and exhausted, filled the transport cabin. As they docked with the Academy vessel, Lina realized something important. She hadn't just survived Nemora Prime. She'd reminded these technologically advanced species of something they'd forgotten. Sometimes the oldest solutions work best. "Just wait until they see what I can do with duct tape," she thought with a grin. Pix settled into the seat beside her, feathers ruffling in the cabin's artificial breeze. "The Academy won't expect this," they said quietly. "Expect what?" Lina asked. "2 highest scores, one using ancestral knowledge," they gestured to themselves, "and one using pure instinct." They nodded toward Lina. They designed this test expecting technology to fail. They didn't expect primitive methods to succeed so completely. "What happens now?" Lina asked. Pix's eyes gleamed. "Now they'll want to study you, the human who outperforms species with millennia of evolutionary advantages." "Great," Lina sighed. "More tests." "Not tests," Pix corrected. "Opportunities. The Academy has a special operations division. They call it regression training, teaching advanced species how to survive when technology fails." "They want me to be a teacher?" Lina asked incredulously. "No," Pix replied with a clicking sound that might have been laughter. "They want us to be partners, the knowledge keeper and the instinct follower. My people's ancient techniques combined with your human adaptability." Lina considered this as the transport docked with the main Academy vessel. Perhaps there was more to this test than simple survival after all. "Partners," she repeated, rolling the word around in her mouth. "I suppose I could teach a bird to tie knots, Ms. Pix made that clicking sound again. "And I could teach a primate to read the forest." As they disembarked, the Academy's commanding officer, a tall, multi-limbed being with crystalline skin, approached them directly. Cadet Hayes, Cadet Pix, they said formally. Report to Special Operations after medical clearance. It seems your primitive methods have opened up evolutionary possibilities. Lina exchanged glances with Pix. Whatever came next would be interesting, to say the least. Told you so, Pix whispered. Fine, Lina whispered back, but I'm still bringing marshmallows next time.